Hello and welcome to another episode of the Africa Matters webinar series. I am Katie Mashile and I will be facilitating today's session. And we are joined by a marketing specialist who will introduce herself shortly and tell us properly pronounce her name because we respect it. Yeah. And without any further ado, let me allow our speaker to introduce herself, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Akinyi Ochieng. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and thank you to the Africa Matters Initiative for inviting me to take part in today's discussion. So by background, I am a social impact consultant. I'm also a marketing strategist, and I've worked with brands in the food, cosmetics, and financial services and technology sector in the US, in Europe, and all across Africa. I've worked across over 30 markets, primarily in a brand marketing and communications capacity. Although I do I have tried my hand at performance marketing and can speak to that. But more broadly than that, what I'm really passionate about is working with brands to enhance their purpose, enhance the way that they advance conversations around pressing social issues, pressing environmental issues, while of course delivering on their bottom line. So I'll leave it there. Actually, maybe one caveat is to say that I'm not representing the views of my employer today. These are just purely my perspectives from having worked in the field.
Perfect. Nice to meet you, Akinyi. Is that how you pronounce your name? Perfect. So I'm super excited for us to get into this discussion because, like I said to you earlier, I am a small business owner myself. So this is basically a lot for me, and it is for everyone that's joining us. So I'm really excited to get into the discussion. But I would like to I think it would be amiss if I didn't bring this up because I am speaking to you from South Africa, and a lot of small businesses are affected because of the current situation. I don't know if you're aware of it, but we'll not dwell on that. But all this to say that with COVID came a lot of other social issues, right, that have affected small businesses in a tremendous way. So I would like for you to maybe speak to that, because with that, we also have seen a lot of other businesses erupt and come up to address the issues that came with COVID as well. So what do you think is like the one marketing strategy that people can use in this time that will also help them thrive post-COVID?
I actually think that now is it's a challenging time for small business, but it's also an opportunity because in every major disruption, there's some shuffling of brand loyalty amongst consumers. So when COVID-19 hit, and even now, many businesses have and continue to struggle with distributing their goods and services in new ways, and also how to reach their customers. When we are all at home, when there are restrictions on gatherings, it's harder to create ads. TV and film production have paused, and many in-person events have been canceled. So it's really an opportunity, I think, fundamentally, to step back and think about how we're engaging with consumers. I think that it's interesting to see, for example, how the event space has evolved in light of COVID-19, right? So you see people shifting away from in-person events, but really creating robust, interesting, dynamic digital experiences. So for example, there's a business that had started pre-pandemic, but really have seen launch and to new heights, is Hop-In, the virtual conferencing platform, allowing businesses to reach their target customers in new and innovative ways that really mimic how people would gather in person. And while that platform appeals primarily to probably more B2B businesses, that's just an example of how different marketers have pivoted to meet the moment. I think as well, you see an increased focus on not only on purpose-driven marketing, and I'm going to distinguish that from cause-driven marketing in a second, but that's one big shift I see. And then finally, I think that there has been a shift as well in a re-emphasis on digital, and not only on just throwing up an ad on social media for an ad's sake, but also on the personalization of that and hyper localization of that. But stepping back for a second, just to the question of purpose-driven marketing, because that's what I'm really passionate about. What I think you've seen is brands really putting themselves in the eyes, brands really stepping into thinking about what is the reality that their consumers are living in. An excellent example, I think, is the travel industry, right? How do you promote travel at a time in which travel is restricted? How do you message that? And I think I'll give you two examples of companies that I've seen do really interesting things at a global level. So Expedia, the large travel, US-based, but with a global remit, travel company, has taken a few interesting approaches to its advertisements. So for example, they had a campaign where they were looking at a couple recreating their holiday experiences at home. The shift towards kind of thinking about staycations, et cetera, and that kind of thing in the industry. You've seen Airbnb, for example, give up some spaces to essential workers, et cetera. I think that those kind of things are what helps a brand stay top of mind, because marketing is just as much about the short-term wins and getting customers today as much as it is about building those longer-term strategies that gets your customers to stick with you for the long haul. So even if, for example, in the travel industry's case, that realistically people are not going to be coming to your hotels right now. They're not going to be flying all over the world. You can invest now in being top of mind. So when you reopen, that those consumers feel that you've had their back, that you understand them, you speak their language, and that you're top of mind, and they'll come back to you. And then a brief thing on the purpose versus cause-driven dynamic. I hear a lot of marketers use the term cause-driven marketing and a purpose-driven marketing. Cause-driven marketing to me is about something that's really short-term orientation at a campaign. Purpose-driven marketing is really when you're investing in a broader vision of what your company stands for, how you're going to back the consumers that you serve ultimately. And I think that this pandemic has really highlighted the importance of, as we talk about that dynamic of balancing that short-term and long-term, it's highlighted the importance of making sure that you're really investing and thinking about that purpose-driven marketing and that you're doing it in an authentic way.
I'm sitting here as a small business owner again, and I am wondering, what kind of financial implications are there to this purpose-driven marketing? Because do you understand, you saying the travel industry, they have not been making money. A lot of businesses have closed down and all that. So there's that reality of the cost. So what is the actual cost implication of digital marketing purposefully?
Yeah, I think that that leads to an interesting conversation, maybe about I think that ROI is top of mind for every marketer, but even probably more so than for small businesses, because you have to make sure that every dollar you spend is delivering. I think that, however, when we think about ROI, people tend to index so heavily on performance-based marketing that they don't consider that there are a plethora of ways that you can measure impact to ensure that you are top of mind for your consumers, and that they're actually converting at the end of the day. I think that customer lifetime value is something that that should be top of mind for every marketer, but even more so for a small business. You have to look at what is the consideration window for your customer, what are the different touch points in their journey, and how can you truncate that, but in a way that is, but also still deliver value, right? It's not just about someone clicking on your Facebook ad isn't usually just them clicking on a Facebook ad. There are a constellation of factors that have led to that. And it's about considering what is that constellation of factors, what's that causal recipe that leads to that ultimate conversion, and how do you quantify that customer lifetime value so you understand how to actually allocate across all those areas. And when you begin to think about things from a lifetime value perspective, I think that that's when purpose-driven marketing really shines through in the importance of doing that. And I think that it can seem daunting maybe for a small business. What does purpose-driven marketing mean for me when I don't have the big bucks to sponsor an event, or I don't have the dollars to spend in a fancy ad campaign like the bigger brands. I think fundamentally it really is about, how am I showing up in my community? If you're a small business, it's really likely that maybe you are more connected to your intimate community, that maybe actually how you step into the world and communicate that brand purpose is about supporting others. So I'll give you a really great example. There's a shoe company called Adams that is based around the corner from me. I live in Brooklyn, New York right now. And they pivoted from selling shoes in the pandemic to selling masks, because they met the moment. They recognized that this is what this community needed. And the masks were still, I think they had a minimal profit or zero profit. They just covered their basic operating costs. But that was an example of them stepping up. And that to me really communicates values.
Yeah. Sure. And now I just want to find out from you. So how would you advise, and I think I'm dwelling too much on small businesses, because I know a lot of the people who would watch this are entrepreneurs, and they're just trying to find out, like, how do I then go about creating a marketing strategy? So what would you say those steps are to doing that?
Oh, let me think about this one. I think that, first of all, you have to keep your consumer state of mind top of mind at all times. It's about this idea of personalization. It's the idea about relevance. We're constantly in an environment in which you're competing for consumer attention. And that's more true than ever in a remote first world. I think another thing that is actually particularly relevant to small businesses is how you think about cross-sell opportunities. How do you cross-promote on platforms? So for example, how can you promote on a platform that caters to singular experiences? And one that comes top of mind for me right now, based on where I am in my life right now, is weddings and home buying. I'm about to get married, hoping to buy a house soon. And so as I look towards, for example, if you're a small business that can cater to brides, how do you actually think about cross-sell opportunities with businesses that are adjacent to you? So for example, if you sell veils, could you be partnering with a company that sells jewelry, right? Is there synergies there? Could you do a combined package and offering it? I'm sure many of you have seen social media giveaways, and often a lot of those are done in joint partnership with another business. So that's one thing. And to give you another example, if you're thinking about real estate, decor, etc., how do you participate in a home buying platform that covers the span of behaviors that you adopt as you're in the mode of being a home buyer, from real estate to moving to decor, etc. How do you partner with other businesses that aren't competing with you but are complementary? I think that's a really big opportunity as a go-to-market strategy. And I think that it's important as we think about making a singular piece of content or a singular campaign do more for us, to think about how it shows up across platforms. How do you be thoughtful in terms of how something appears on your TV, on your smartphone, on your computer? Because as people are at home, they're engaging with your product across many devices often. So how do you deliver messages across platforms? And also particularly in an environment where we're at home more than ever, how do you do that in a way that's not too intrusive?
And I'm just curious now as to whether in the near future we'll still have traditional marketing, like you're speaking about television, you're speaking about, because that's what used to work, right? I was a PR assistant somewhere, nothing close to what you do, but I was a PR assistant once in my life, and we spent a lot of money on traditional marketing in that organization, like paying for newspapers and all these things. Do you think that there's still room for that? I think, let me start the question that way. Do you think there's still room for that in this digital age?
I do think that there's still room for it. It's just about what percentage mix are you going to give that to? So what percentage of your marketing budget are you going to give that, right? I think that you really have to think about the unique needs of your consumer and how what channels are most relevant to them. For example, a financial services brand, I'm probably not going to tell them to spend a lot of money on TV. It doesn't really make sense, I think, as a platform because of how high consideration that particular type of product tends to be. But something that's very visually driven, right? If something that is a car, for example, we want to see it zoom across the screen, or an event experience, etc. You have to figure out what platforms are best suited for the product that you are ultimately selling. So I think that's a very indirect answer, but I hope a helpful one.
It is somewhat helpful, but I think what I am really wanting to ask is, do you think that we should, and I understand that you're saying, okay, it depends on what product you are selling and who you want to get the product to, but do you think that we should be more, should everyone be advertising digitally? I think essentially that's everyone's question now. Should everyone have an Instagram account now? Should everyone be on LinkedIn? Is that what should happen?
Yes. Oh,
or
yes. My short answer is, I'm interrupting because it's yes, yes, yes. But it's yes and, right? It's not the only thing you should do. And I know that's a very frustrating answer sometimes to hear the yes and, the but and, but everyone should be digital because that is just where people are, particularly people, young people, particularly people in the millennial, Gen Z cohort, etc. Digital is an important part of the strategy, and it will always be an important part of the strategy. I think, however, it's about considering that digital is a point in time, and often you want a direct response sometimes, but digital, to create more efficiencies in digital, you have to engage in other activities. You have to engage in that brand building work. You have to engage in communications, etc. Because they help. It's the rising tide that lifts all boats, so to speak. I mean, there's a quote that I really love. It's that I'm trying to remember how it goes. Brand marketing is what encourages consumers to raise their hands, but it's performance marketing that makes it easy to get the product into the hand, if that makes sense, right? So you are priming people through the things that are non-digital, but it's the digital that ultimately gets them to take hold of it. I think that's increasingly true for a lot of, particularly for consumer goods.
That's interesting, and I will invite the people who are in the chat and who are watching by Facebook to please leave a comment, ask your questions. We are wanting to hear your opinions on this. I am literally being selfish on this session because I really want to understand more on how we can grow our businesses and how that's going to look in the near future. And I think that's just interesting to imagine, like, what is marketing going to look like in the future? Is what we are doing now going to be relevant post-COVID? Because now everything is on Zoom, but should the world reopen again, what will then happen to all these investments that we've made to these digital platforms? And I'd like to pick your brain on that. What do you think that marketing is going to look like post-COVID? Are we going to go back, do you think, or are we not going to meet anymore even when we can?
I don't think there's a back. I think there's a forward. I think there's lessons learned that we incorporate, but I think that the way that that consumers purchase products, consider products, the way that we activate brand awareness, that's fundamentally going to change moving forward. And just before this call, I was looking at some data from McKinsey on kind of global consumer sentiment. And it's interesting, right? There are things that apply across countries. You know, it doesn't really matter what market you're in. So they were looking, for example, at the traditional big economies, the US, UK, France, etc. They also looked at Nigeria, obviously Africa's largest economy. They looked at South Africa, Egypt, and Morocco. And what they were seeing is that consumers are increasingly turning to digital and reduced contact ways of accessing products and services. So, for example, in Nigeria, more than 50% of consumers are now shopping at new stores, retailers, and websites. They are purchasing essentials in store, but it's the discretionary purchases that ship online. So by essentials, it's the everyday food stuff, it's household goods. For all the discretionary things, it's the clothes, it's the luxury products, etc. Those are shifting online. So I also think it's important to consider, like, what bucket do you fall in? Are you a food producer, for example? Are you selling some kind of food product? Okay, then in-store is always probably going to be a fundamental part of your experience, unless maybe you're a dry goods product, then it's a bit different. That's a bit different. But so I think that that's an important trend. And I also think that what we've seen is during the pandemic, and I certainly did this, and as I'm sure many of you on the line did, I turned to my Instagram more. I found myself spending more time on my Instagram and actually engaging in Instagram shopping. And so, for example, in the US now, 34% of people have said they've shopped on Instagram based on an influencer recommendation. I think that kind of behavior is here to stay, and it will only increase. And that's not only true in the US, that's true in other markets.
That's definitely becoming truer and truer, more and more true. Mm-hmm. And I say that because I have not always been, I don't know, maybe it's just a little bit of like, I don't want to do what other children are doing, but I've not always been interested in products that are like advertised by influencers and all that, because I just thought it's just a little bit of hype here and there, and this person's getting paid for it. But if more and more now, I find myself actually like trying products out that I see being recommended by influencers, because this is a person who perhaps has the same hair texture as me. So I want to maybe try what worked for them. So I really agree with you on that I don't believe that that's something that's going to go away. But there's a question, and I'm looking on my computer screen. There's a question in the chat, and it's that what are the challenges that you foresee as having post-COVID because of the over digitalization right now? I'm assuming, what do you think could be a possible challenge once COVID ends? Hopefully it ends.
Mm-hmm. I do think that, let me think about that one. I mean, I'll speak in terms of what I'm focused on right now, and then maybe zoom out to think about the digital a bit more, because I know that that's top of mind for many of the people on the line. In my own work, right now, I am focused really on purpose-driven marketing, and helping brands figure out how do they authentically step into the world and support their consumers, build brand awareness in engaging ways while actually advancing social outcomes. And one thing I've seen is that brands are often competing to see who can be the most progressive right now. They're competing to see who can be the most quote unquote woke. And I think that sometimes they do that in a way that is out of step with who they are and where they're authentically placed to have a voice, right? So to give you an example, I think one of the brands that's often cited as a forerunner, as a thought leader, as an exemplar in the purpose-driven marketing space is Patagonia, the outdoor apparel brand. And I think that in their case, one of the issues that they really focus on is environmental sustainability, environmental conservation. They do engage on other issues, but they're very squarely focused on there. They're not trying to get into every debate. And I think that that is actually the right way for brands to go, is to pick the lane where you can have the most impact, where your product is actually complementary and aligned, so it doesn't seem that you are all over the place, and emphasize that. How does your product intersect with how what your community needs? So I think that that's something that is top of mind for me. Of how do we right the overcorrection that some brands have made in the rush to feel to be relevant in the COVID era from a purpose-driven perspective. How are they going to recalibrate? That's something that I'm thinking a lot about these days. But on the digital front and how things will shift, I think that it's interesting to see the rise of TikTok. And I think that TikTok has become more and one of the most important social media platforms today, but it's something that really took off in a new way via COVID, right? And I think that the virality, the discoverability of the platform is really fascinating. The instructional nature of it, right? So you have so many TikTok influencers who are actually doing explainers. That's a lot of the content on that platform. So how do brands plug into that? How do brands plug into the ways of communicating that are unique to TikTok as a platform, for example? And Africa is one of the biggest growth markets for TikTok. A lot of people are on the platform. So I think that's an area that I am trying to get smarter on myself. And I would encourage those who aren't on TikTok, who aren't exploring that or sensitizing themselves to it, to really look at that platform, particularly as you look to an increasingly younger consumer base for whom that is increasingly their platform of choice.
I'm not on TikTok. And I am trying not to get on TikTok. Like it's been one of those things for me that I don't want to be on TikTok. Like, no, but I'll get TikTok. I'll get it for business purposes.
Exactly. Okay. It's a market research opportunity.
Right. But I also want to, like, something you touched on is the over compensation, if I can put it like that, that brands usually feel the need to have, like, especially with movements like Black Lives Matter, like everybody was now trying to do the most, quite literally, to just be, sometimes to just be seen, but sometimes because really nobody really knows what to do and what not. So I want to hear from you from a marketing perspective, because from a social perspective, it's almost as though people are expected to say something. Like, if you don't say anything, something's wrong. So do you think that it's absolutely necessary for, say now this is the fold where the company works, like this is their purpose field, is it absolutely necessary for them to have a response when something happens? Is that important for the market?
I think it's a very interesting question. I think that in South Africa, the US, everywhere globally, even, I mean, even in Nigeria, I think that the NSARS movement was ultimately tied to Black Lives Matter in many ways. I will say, I think it's important that companies take a stand. I think what that stand is where there is disagreement or where there is some room for debate. I also think that the timing of it is important. I don't think that it's always appropriate for companies to externally, at least. I think internally, it's important for a dialogue perspective to make employees feel seen and heard. But I think that you have to do it strategically, because, for example, if you speak up for on every instance of violence against Black people, are you going to do that when there are major instances of violence against Asian people, for example? You have to think about it from a perspective of equity, not only in speaking up for one group, but in speaking up for all. So I think that that's a decision calculus that organizations have to make. And I think that there should be, to be honest, a rubric for how you respond and when you respond. I think that brands should be more considered about developing a criteria for how they're going to step in and when they will. But I also think that when I see these statements as to what companies plan to do on Black Lives Matter, I'm only impressed when I see an accountability measure included. So what are you actually going to do? When are you going to tell us? When are you going to give us more information about it? And who are you partnering with? I think that it's important, particularly for those, for businesses that are non-diverse or who are led from people who are not of that community who want to engage in this issue, that they turn to working with people who have ties to the communities, and in what we're talking about in particular, to the Black community, so that any response is centered actually in what that community needs instead of what that people think that community needs. So I think that that's a starting point.
I love what you just said. I absolutely love it. Also because that's like a topic that's near and dear to my heart, but I'm not going to go there. I'm actually curious as you're speaking. So on the 18th of July, it's Nelson Mandela's birthday. So it's actually an international holiday.
Yeah.
It's called International Mandela Day. I didn't know it was international because my whole life it's been Mandela Day here in South Africa. So I just found out that it's actually an international holiday. And what happens in South Africa usually is that, and this is like a huge marketing event for a lot of companies because they'll go to hospitals, they'll be giving gifts to children, they'll be going to orphanages. So it's usually the CSI day of
Yeah.
many companies, big and small alike. So I'm wondering what kind of CSI activity, because like this is one of them. Like I'm seeing stuff like the Black Lives Movement and the involvement of companies as an actual CSI strategy that people can do online. But what other CSI strategies can work in that, like you're saying, in that purpose-driven marketing mindset to say we are creating longevity, we're creating relationships with the community. In this age, like what would be some strategies that you could suggest?
I think there's, I look at it from a few perspectives. One is programs. One is policies, both internal and external, like what policies are you adopting, what public policies are you pushing for? And then probably perspectives, so 3 Ps. So on the programs point, it's programs and partnerships, maybe I'll bucket it there. It's about how are you building relationships with communities and with your local community and accelerating the good work that they're doing that aligns with your brand purpose. I think that's a programs and partnerships element. So it's what can you build on that you're doing already? What can you start anew that advances some social outcome that aligns perhaps in this instance with what Nelson Mandela stood for? It's particularly in light of the last 18 months and what is represented for the global Black community. From a policies perspective, I think it's about making sure your corporate social responsibility, you're looking at different stakeholders. You're looking at literally the community around you, maybe the city, the town, the country. You're looking at regulators, but also looking at your employees. So you have to look internally and say, how are we actually supporting our people? Are we advancing equity internally? From an internal perspective, and then externally, are we using our voice to advance public policy that supports marginalized communities? I think that's one. And then finally, from the perspective standpoint, I think that it's critical to use your voice. And so, for example, from a marketing perspective, are you depicting Black people in your advertisements? How are you depicting them? How are you shifting the perception of how people think about Black people writ at large? So it's that programs and partnerships perspective. It's that policies, both internal and external, remembering that your employees are a stakeholder group that you need to be responsive to. And then it's that perspectives. How are you shifting the social conversation?
That's actually, I like the part where you speak about employees and there was a comment that I saw it was looking down. But I love what you said about employees before I share the comment, because usually that's like a neglected stakeholder group, and employees are a very big part. Can you please just speak more into that? Like, how can we leverage on the staff that we have or the human resources that we have when it comes to marketing as well?
Oh, yes. I think that this is a totally undertapped resource that companies underestimate. But also just from a brand risk perspective, if your own house is not in order, how can you then go out and speak about issues? So for example, if you're mistreating, if there is entrenched systemic racism within your organization, you cannot credibly speak about systemic racism externally. You really have to look inwards. I mean, otherwise you risk a situation in which perhaps you have employees who are going online on platforms that host job reviews, the Glassdoors, all those kind of things, and speaking ill of your company because what your external actions are not aligning with your internal dialogue. So I think that's one aspect. Secondly, I think that employees can be amazing ambassadors for what you're doing. I'll give you a really concrete example. So I used to work for a company called WorldRemit. that specializes in digital money transfers and globally. And the team is very global. And so the customers are actually very similar demographically to the company's actual team. So what they did, which I thought was a really recently, and I've since left, but this is a recent campaign they did that I thought was just brilliant, was build on the diversity of the employees. The campaign was, I carry two flags, and it talked about that intersectional identity of being an immigrant. And so that's raising awareness to consumers who might purchase that product, but it's also celebrating internal diversity. And starting a dialogue at the company, but also more broadly about how important it is that we welcome, we celebrate the value that diversity brings to our workforce. So those are just a couple of examples.
I always say that we need to kind of create a culture where the employees are, like you're saying, the ambassadors. They are the first people to like a post. They are the first people to share it, even in this portfolio, like of doing the webinars at Africa Matters, it's always, I always feel like, now I need to share this. It's not even from I'm obligated to share it, but I'm excited that I'm a part of this thing. Therefore, I want to share this with other people. I want my friends to now come and watch the webinars and all that. So I really do think that we should and we can leverage more on the human resources that we have. I just really don't know how, because in many instances I've been like in teams where, like a friend of mine is running a social media campaign for a certain company, and she asked on their WhatsApp group every Monday, please share this. So the whole staff, like WhatsApp statuses, everybody is sharing the same posters every single Monday. So that's such a beautiful thing, but I don't necessarily know, like, how else can we encourage people to advocate for the companies that they work for? I don't know if maybe you have any ideas. Well,
I think there are a couple of ways. So I think I'll give you two examples, one from Instagram and one from LOreal. So for example, I've noticed that many people who work for Instagram, particularly on the creative side, some of them are influencers themselves. And that's a statement, actually, because what it's showing is that they not only understand the product intimately, but they're also showcasing the best practices. So it encourages more people to think about this as a career, to think about this as a source of revenue. And it's really showing people by doing. So I think that's something really interesting that I've seen from Instagram. Secondly, a company like LOreal, right? They have, and this is not unique to LOreal, it's just an example. Many cosmetics companies, many consumer goods companies do this, will give employees a discount. On one hand, you could say it's a benefit. On the other hand, you could also say it's about getting employees excited about the products that the company produces. One of my friends used to work for L'Oreal, and I'd say, oh my God, your skin is so beautiful. What do you use? Well, she uses the company products, right? That's an advertisement in and of itself. So I think it's about making your employees really a brand ambassador. If you're selling bags, right? Do you want to give your employees a discount or a free bag as a benefit, and have them walk down the street and have other people ask them where they got that? Well, actually, I work for this company and it's from this company. So really engage employees really tactically in that. I think that's a great strategy to consider.
Indeed. And we literally dwelling on this too long, but it's just quite interesting for me. But would you then say that it's cheating if Instagram specifically hires influencers and not that the employees happen to be influencers? Does that make sense? Like, is it wise?
Mm-hmm. I think it's more so the latter. I think it's the employees happen to be influencers. Obviously, don't work for Instagram, not representing them at all, but I think from my external perspective, it does seem to be more so that latter. It's not that they're hiring people who are influencers to be that, it's that it's an added benefit and a value add, and it's encouraged because it not only heightens their understanding of how the product works, but also is a demonstrable example of how you leverage the platform to grow your profile and to build brand partnerships.
And like my question is more on the side of the brand partnerships, because I've seen like NGOs, small businesses, and even big businesses actually hire influencers to become ambassadors. So it's almost, I don't know if we'd call them brand partnership or if it's an actual like employment status when influencers hired. Is something like that, do you think something like that is like, okay, that's a great idea, do that, or is it like some form of cheating? I don't know if that's even possible in the digital.
Do you mean can you give me an example? So do you mean like a healthcare company hiring an influencer? Is that a great idea, or is that does that create risks? Or am I misunderstanding your question?
I think you understood it and you even articulated it way better than I was actually thinking about it. Now, for instance, answer as you answer.
Yeah, I think that it's important to always disclose the nature of the partnership. Transparency is what builds trust. So I'm not going to trust an influencer, and this is just me speaking personally, but I think this behavior also extends to many people. I am not going to trust someone who's promoting a product does not disclose that they were paid for it, because I don't know, because is this an impartial point of view, or is it one that is suggested and informed by a third party? So I think it's always important to disclose the nature of the relationship. And that's why it's, from tagging to kind of the branding, like the paid partnership with at the top of the post. I think those are all things that are critical to build trust with the influencers community of followers. But that being said, I do think that influencer marketing is an incredibly important strategy in this day and age. It's really just it's a digitized version of word of mouth. And we know that word of mouth is a really important facet of how consumers discover brands, why they purchase brands. And I mean, even in my own life, I am the product evangelist in my group of friends. If I like a product, I will tell everyone about it. I think that people think about influencing as something maybe you have when you have 25,000, 100,000, 1 million followers. But everyone, and actually even micro-senses, can be influencers. And I think actually that's an opportunity for brands to think about how do you engage micro-influencers, because often it's their communities that are really, really attentive to their content. I can think of a few influencers, for example, some of who are friends, some of them are just people with smaller followings who are really engaged and connected with the people who are following them, who I regularly will turn to and view their content because I'm interested in hearing what they're saying. Because I think that, to your point about you want to see what someone does your same hair texture is doing. You want to turn to people who you think understand and reflect your experience. So I think that influencer marketing is always going to be an incredibly important part of the strategy, because ultimately it is just that digitized version of word of mouth. And we know that that is one of the most important phenomenons that contributes to to purchasing behavior.
Amen. I would say amen to that. What did you call yourself? A product evangelist. And now I think you can add marketing evangelist to that, because this will be absolutely amazing. The comment that was on here was, wouldn't it be weird though that a company would have like a TikTok? But as you're speaking, I'm thinking actually companies don't need to have TikTok accounts. Exactly. If they are working with influencers already are on TikTok.
Yeah, and that's more so what I meant. I think that is actually even more effective as a strategy. It's about not only the company working with people who have that reach. For example, I don't, let me think of some random company. I don't follow Delta Airlines on any social media platform. However, I do see a lot of influencers I follow promoting them. So what does that say about Delta's presence? Maybe that they're investing more in the influencer strategy than they are in their owned platform. And in some instances, in some categories, I think that's a really great idea. The same applies, I think, for particularly for financial services brands. I think that's true. I mean, who wants to follow a bank on Instagram?
That's true.
It's an important part of the strategy. Don't get me wrong. But I think that there are other ways to leverage that platform that don't center on the company's own channel itself.
Mm-hmm. No, I fully agree. There's this girl in South Africa. She's called the Black Wendy. People should go follow her. Absolutely amazing. But she's a brand ambassador for a certain bank, and it's so amazing how she incorporates the ads into her content because she's a comedian. She has this persona like our Black mom. So she like does this like videos like depicting like jokes about what Black moms would how Black moms would respond to certain things. And recently she ran a campaign where she was showing internet banking and how important that is for women's communities. Because I don't know, in an African sense, it's like a stokvel. So it's like women come together and kind of bring money together. And this month they're giving this person money. So it's a form of saving in a sense. But yeah, it's complicated. Anyway, she was actually using her platform with her content, showing how these women can actually do that with online banking, you know? And it was so great how I think my mom would have even gotten it. Like, I don't even think, I think my grandmother would have gotten it, right? It was, for me, like when you say that, I remember that. And the fact that I remember it shows just how effective that strategy
is. It's the brand recall. And so as I think about, you know, one of the questions we were talking about before this webinar was the question of ROI. And even though maybe you haven't gotten that bank account or you haven't taken action yet, the fact that you recall that advertisement, that is a demonstration of success, because it means that you are more likely after repeated exposure to convert. So there's a range of metrics we need to look at as we're thinking about what's effective and how we want to allocate and spend our time.
Okay. No, that's definitely true. I recently changed banks because of how many times this ad was popping up like on my screen, and I was like, I just want to see if your interest rate is really that great, and I still haven't closed it, so it means that they're working. So,
I mean, I'll give you another example of something I thought was like just brilliant. So in the UK, there's this card, bank rather, called Monzo, and their card is coral. It's really, really bright, and so whenever someone takes out a card, you notice. And so you begin to notice, oh, everyone around you has a Monzo card. That is a form of marketing. They encourage people to, I mean, obviously cover your card number, but to show, oh, I just got my Monzo card today. The envelope that it comes in even is beautiful and really thoughtfully designed. That is also a form of marketing. Like really thinking about the experience.
Amen. Once again. No, I feel like you and I could have this conversation for the whole day. Okay, that is still the same comment that I'm looking at. We could have this conversation for the whole day. And I don't know, I hope I'm not closing anyone out. If they have questions, just gonna give, you can just raise a hand if you're on the Zoom. I'm gonna check if anybody's hand is risen or raised. Then I'll just let you come on and ask your question. Yeah, but in the absence of which, I would like to then ask you to, like, just in rounding off the conversation, some of the things that stand out for me, like the very last thing you said now was that marketing is about the entire experience of the thing. And like you said, with purpose-driven marketing, that it's not just about, oh, I need you to buy this product today, or I need to make my money back. I spent $50 on this, I need to make $100. It's not necessarily always about the immediate monetary response that you get, but it's the long-term relationship that you build with your target audience. And the other thing that really stood out for me, and I'm gonna go do this, is get a TikTok. But
I love to hear that. It took me a while, but I was convinced recently.
I'm also convinced, but it's fine. I think they're gonna laugh immediately when I tell them I'm getting TikTok. But yeah, that basically what I get from that is leverage the free marketing platforms that you have, because that's essentially what social media is. It's free marketing, and you are literally directly speaking to your target audience. So I think those are the three things that I can take away from this. But I'm gonna throw the ball back to you and ask you, what are some of the key things that you would want someone to take away from the conversation, and also what's just some general advice that you can give to marketers and people seeking to market their businesses?
Mm-hmm. I think that it's really critical. One, the first thing I would say is it's really critical to understand your consumer. Who are they? And I think that one of the best ways to do that is really to create personas. So I think that doing user research, I did some courses in user research, and that's one of the best investments I've made in myself as a marketer, to really think about how does my target consumer behave, where are they, who are they, and really bring them to life, giving them a name, etc. Really designing every campaign and experience with those people in mind. So that's one thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is to really think about the right mix that you need based on your customer, and understand what that customer lifetime value looks like. Is this a repeat customer? Is it a transactional customer? And how can you also work with your customer to make them an advocate and a product evangelist like me? I think that's the second thing. And then the third thing I would say is to really think about, if you're doing anything from the purpose perspective, to really think about things from that 3 Ps perspective. It's the programs and partnerships, or 4 Ps really. The programs and partnerships, it's the policies you implement, and it's also the perspective that you put out into the world.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. Thank you. This is literally just such a refreshing conversation with everything that is happening in the world. But again, like, we still need, like, our economy, like our president often says, we need to now start balancing between growing the economy and saving lives. And we cannot save lives without a thriving economy. And that falls back to marketing. I think we often underestimate the power of marketing, or the importance of marketing, because we're just like, it's the last thing that I'm going to spend money on, or it's the last thing I'm going to spend time on. And actually, it's the thing that makes you get money to spend and time to do everything else. So thank you so much for taking the time. If anybody has any more questions after this, the live stream on Facebook is going to stay on the Africa Matters page. So let's continue the conversation over there, and let's just let's all go get TikTok accounts or follow some influencers and try and make friends with them if we can't afford to pay them yet. I'm joking. But yeah, in essence, let's all take the small steps and make sure that we build our brands, and we get to where we need to as young people, especially, and make a lot of money. So yeah.
Yes.
With that.
Yes. Thank you so much. And
with that,
yeah, thank you so much for giving me this space, and it was a great conversation.
Thank you. I'm going to end this with that, and I'm definitely going to keep your email address, because I'm going to. Can you please let us know where what are your handles before I end this? What are your handles?
So you can find me online at akinyiochieng.com, AKINYIOCHIENG. I'm on Twitter as well, and on LinkedIn. You can reach me at Kiki, KIKIOCHIENG on Twitter, and find my full name on LinkedIn.
Perfect. I'm going to copy that information onto the comment box on Facebook, so that everyone can be able to just click from there and get to your website and all your platforms. Great. What's your TikTok handle? Because I'm sure you
that one is a secret. It's an investigator TikTok. I lurk.
Okay. Forget that I asked. No, you should have a lovely day for that.
Yeah, exactly. But thank you so much, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Definitely.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.